Somewhere in the American Northwest, among the dense forests and hills, lurked the Lake of the Gloomy Shadow. This place was surrounded by an aura of mysticism and fear. Locals said that every winter the lake water seemed to exhale, a fog that drifted over the ground, drowning out any sounds. People avoided the place, calling it cursed. 5 friends, united by their love of adventure and thirst for adrenaline, decided to go there to test the old legends. Among them was Lily, a brave girl with a camera who dreamed of becoming a famous blogger. She had always been drawn to mysticism. Jason, the most skeptical of the company, thought it was all silly, scary stories for kids. Ashley, the youngest of the group, saw the trip as an opportunity to get away from the bustling city. The others, Tom and Mark, just couldn't give up the idea of spending the night by the mysterious lake. By the time the boys reached the lake, the sun was already setting over the horizon. The water shimmered with an ominous light in the last rays of sunset. Lily immediately pulled out her camera and started filming, and Jason sarcastically remarked, "So where are your monsters? I only see mosquitoes so far." But once the sun was completely hidden, the atmosphere changed. Night brought with it strange sounds. There was no wind, but the trees whispered as if sharing their secrets. From the water came a quiet, barely audible splash. "Did you hear that?" Ashley asked, snuggling against Tom. "It's just a fish," Jason answered, though his voice shook. They made camp close to the shore. They made a fire to keep warm, but the warmth of the fire couldn't dispel the growing sense of unease. Late at night, when the others were asleep, Lily decided to look around the lakeshore. The camera in her hands recorded every movement. The girl was walking along the water when she noticed something strange. In the light of the moon, she saw footprints in the sand. But they were not human footprints. They were too long, with sharp, claw-like indentations. "Guys, you have to see this!" she shouted, but no one answered. At that moment, a hoarse voice came from the fog. "Help me!" Lily froze. Fear and curiosity struggled inside her. "Who's there?" she asked, pointing the flashlight toward the sound. The fog moved, and a figure emerged from it. It was a man, all wet, with a distorted face, as if his body had been subjected to something unnatural. His eyes glittered with a strange, inhuman light. "Go away before it's too late," he whispered before disappearing. Lily ran back towards the camp. But when she returned, she found her friends gone. The campfire was still burning, but the backpacks were scattered and the tents were torn. Lily, frantically catching her breath, stared at the ruined camp. The silence pressed on her ears. It seemed that even the forest was frozen in anticipation. The only thing she could hear was the faint murmur of water near the shore and her own rapid heartbeat. She started looking around the camp, hoping to find some clue as to what had happened to her friends. At her feet, she spotted Jason's camera. Picking it up, Lily turned on the recording. The screen flashed, showing snippets of what had happened. The tape showed them all sitting around a campfire. Ashley was telling a story about how her grandmother had warned about the dangers of dark places. But suddenly the camera caught a sudden movement in the fog behind them. A faint silhouette appeared and disappeared as if watching them. Then there was an eerie, low roar, and the screen plunged into chaos. The camera dropped, but in the last frame, Lily caught sight of something. A huge silhouette that resembled a human/reptilian hybrid. Its eyes glowed with a bright yellow light. Lily felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. "This can't be true," she whispered. She didn't have time for doubts, however. Suddenly she heard a faint crunching of twigs somewhere nearby. Someone or something was approaching. She hid behind a large boulder, trying not to breathe. The footsteps came closer and closer. The moon illuminated part of the shore, and Lily saw it. The creature. It was a tall, massive monster with long clawed hands covered in scales. Its face resembled a human face, but it was distorted beyond recognition. Huge bone plates glistened on the creature's back, and a viscous, black liquid dripped from its mouth. The creature leaned over the remains of the fire, sniffing the ground. Its breath sounded like a muffled growl that made the air seem heavy. Lily tried not to move, but her heart was pounding so loudly she was afraid the monster would hear her. "We have to run," she thought, clutching the camera in her hands. But just as she started to back away, her foot caught a dry branch. A cracking sound traveled through the night like thunder. The creature's head instantly turned in her direction. Its yellow eyes stared into her, and Lily felt paralyzed with terror. The creature let out a piercing scream, and the mist around it swirled as if obeying its will. She ran as fast as she could to get as far away from the shore as possible. Branches whipped at her face. Rocks scratched her palms, but fear made her move faster than she ever could. The forest seemed to come alive. The trees seemed to pull their branches toward her, and the roots tried to grab her legs. The fog grew thicker and thicker, and she began to lose her bearings. Suddenly, she saw a faint light ahead. It was the woodsman's cabin they had spotted as they walked toward the lake. Lily rushed to it, banging on the door as hard as she could. "Help! Open up! It's after me!" The door opened, and an elderly man with a shotgun appeared on the doorstep. "Are you out of your mind? Why were you at the lake?" he asked angrily, pulling her inside and closing the door with a massive deadbolt. There's something in the water. It killed my friends," she screamed, barely catching her breath. The old man frowned. "It's not just something. It's a caller from the depths. The local lore didn't lie. It comes out of the water to take the souls of those who dare to disturb its peace." Lily trembled, barely listening to the old man's words. He quickly slid the massive bolts shut and checked the windows. His house was like a fortress-thick log walls, bars on the windows, and a pile of hunting trophies that inspired not so much calm as grim anxiety. "Did you know about this?" Lily exhaled, clutching her cell in her hands. Why didn't anyone warn her? The old man grinned grimly. "Who warns? Tourists don't listen. And who would believe an old fool? But I warned the people who used to live here. Most are gone. Or missing." Lily stared at him. "What is that thing? That creature? It can't be real." The old man sighed, poured himself a mug of tea and, gesturing for the girl to sit down, began to speak. "It's more real than you think. Legend has it that the Lake of Gloomy Shadow appeared centuries ago after a catastrophe. They say it used to be an ordinary settlement. But one day, sacrifices were thrown into the water to placate evil spirits that caused disease. People believed that the water spirits would protect them. But the spirits are not forgiving when disturbed. They send a caller, a hunter who comes after their victims." The old man looked at Lily with tension. "The caller comes out of the water and takes all those who have disturbed his peace. But he doesn't just kill, he uses the mist to lure. Did you hear his voice?" Lily nodded slowly, remembering the words. "Help me? Was it a trap?" she asked. "Yes," the old man said firmly. "The fog is his weapon. It confuses people, makes them see things that aren't there. And when it's close, you can't escape." There was a sudden scraping sound outside the window. Lily flinched, and the old man stood up, grabbing his gun. "It's here," he whispered. Lily went to the window, but a thick fog shrouded everything around her. Suddenly there was a thud at the door. Lily gasped, recoiling backward. "It wants in," she shouted. "Get a hold of yourself," the old man shouted, pointing his gun at the door. "This thing has a weakness. I learned about it from the old records of the local pastor. It's afraid of fire and the sound of church bells." Lily looked around, seeing a small bell hanging on the wall. Would it work? Unlikely, but it was worth a try. The second blow to the door was harder. The wood cracked, and Lily saw the creature's claws smashing through it. "Get to the basement," the old man commanded. The basement was even darker than the house. The old man lit an oil lamp that cast shivering shadows on the walls. Lily watched him spread old maps and books across the table. "If you want to survive, you have to go to the old church on the other side of the lake," he said. "There's a bell there. We must use it to drive the caller away." "The other side?" Lily swallowed. "But how are we going to get there if it's chasing us?" The old man took the lighter and shoved it into the girl's hands. "You stay close to me. I have a boat. If we're careful, we'll get there alive." The next events unfolded like a nightmare. The caller was always near. Their boat floated through the fog, and strange rustling and splashing came from the depths. At one point, the shadow of a creature flashed just under the water, and Lily screamed. But the old man apparently knew what to do. He threw something into the water that drove the monster away until they reached the shore. It was quiet by the church. Too quiet. There were ruined tombstones lying around, and the church itself looked abandoned. "Is this place safe?" Lily whispered. "It's only safe if we can ring the bell in time," the old man answered as he ran up the steps. But just as they entered, the caller reappeared. His huge figure completely blocked the entrance, and Lily realized they were out of time. Lily felt everything inside clench with fear. The creature filled the entrance to the church, its yellow eyes burning in the fog, and its clawed paws slowly clawed at the stone threshold, making a horrible scraping sound. "Hurry! To the tower!" shouted the old man, pointing to the stairs leading to the bell. Lily ran first, barely holding back her sobs. The old man stayed behind to hold off the caller. From behind her back came muffled gunshots and the monster's furious roar. "Go, don't look back!" shouted the old man, but his voice was quickly drowned out by the hoarse roar of the creature. Lily reached the wooden staircase that led to the bell tower. Each step up the rickety steps made a cracking noise. The only thought in her head was, "Get to the bell." When she reached the top, she had a view of an ancient, moss-covered bell. It was huge and seemed too heavy to be moved with one hand. "How do I?" Lily whispered, gasping. A terrible cracking sound came from below. The caller burst into the church. Its roar echoed in the stone walls. Lily realized she had no time. She grabbed the rope tied to the bell and began to pull as hard as she could. But it was too hard. Lily tugged desperately until the first muffled sound escaped from the depths of the metal. Boom! The bell echoed with a low rumble that filled the entire space. Lily felt the vibration travel across the floor beneath her feet. But the caller didn't stop. He was already climbing the stairs. His claws were scraping the wood, tearing off chunks. "No, no, no," Lily whispered, continuing to pull. She gathered the last of her strength and yanked the rope with such force that the bell rang at full power. The loud, clear sound tore through the fog. The caller howled. Its scream was so piercing that Lily had to clamp her ears shut. The creature wriggled as if the sound was burning him. Its body began to shake and then break apart, like smoke being carried away by the wind. When it subsided, Lily sank to her knees. The mist began to clear, and through it showed the first rays of dawn. The creature was gone, but the old man's body lay below. She went down to him, but it was too late. He had done everything he could to keep her alive. Lily did not reach the nearest town until 24 hours later. Ragged, exhausted, she handed her camera over to the police, telling her story. No one believed her, but the camera footage of the caller was forever proof that the lake of gloomy shadow hid a terrible secret. However, even years later, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that the mist was still watching her wherever she went. It had been several years since Lily had left the cursed lake. She had moved to another town and tried to live like a normal person. However, the fear that had settled deep in her soul wouldn't let go. Every time a thick fog appeared on the street, it seemed to her that a figure with burning yellow eyes was about to emerge from it. Lily tried to drown out her memories by immersing herself in her work. She got a job in television and started making documentaries about urban legends and mysteries. It made her feel stronger, like she was in control of her fears. But one day, her life took another turn. Late one night, as Lily was editing a new movie, she received a strange letter in her mail. It was sent from an unknown address and contained only one line. "You think you got rid of him? The lake is calling you back." There was a video file attached to the letter. Lily hesitated, but decided to open it. An image appeared on the screen. It was her camp by the lake, filmed from high above. The camera seemed to hover above the ground, slowly approaching the water. A mist enveloped everything around it. Then something appeared on the screen that made the blood run cold in Lily's veins. Huge clawed footprints on the shore. She turned off the video, trying to calm herself down. This is someone's evil joke, Lily thought, but her heart told her it wasn't. The next day, she received another message. This time it was a picture. It showed the old woodsman's cabin where she had taken shelter that night. But now the house was destroyed, and standing in front of the entrance was something familiar, the figure of the caller. Lily realized she would have to go back. She gathered her equipment, grabbed her camera, and contacted the group of researchers she sometimes worked with. 2 journalists, Tom and Emma, agreed to accompany her. They didn't know the whole truth, but enthusiastically supported the idea of making a movie about the cursed lake. When they reached the lake, things looked different. The water seemed as dark as oil, and there was an oppressive feeling in the air. The forest around them was dead, no sounds of birds, no rustling of leaves. "This place is really creepy," Tom muttered, filming the whole thing. Emma walked over to Lily. "Are you sure there's something mystical about this place? Maybe it's just a legend?" Lily didn't answer anything. Her gaze was fixed on the water. She knew something had awakened. They made camp, but as night fell, everything went wrong. A thick fog appeared in the air, and the same whisper came again. "Help me." Tom grabbed the lantern. What was that? Who's here? But Lily knew. She knew the caller was back. "Let's go. Now," she shouted, but it was too late. The fog began to thicken, cutting them off from the exit. Within the white haze, silhouettes appeared. Not just one, but several. What the hell is that?" Emma screamed, backing away. Lily realized that the caller was no longer alone. Perhaps her friends who had disappeared that night were also part of this nightmare. Lily clutched the lantern, trying not to panic. The fog thickened, becoming almost impenetrable, and the strange silhouettes drew closer and closer. Their movement was jagged, as if they were moving and dissolving into the haze at the same time. "Get away to the boat," she shouted, but Tom and Emma froze in place, mesmerized by the terrifying sight. The silhouettes looked human, but their bodies seemed distorted, like reflections in a crooked mirror. The faces were blank, without eyes, only bottomless shadows. But worst of all, their figures emitted a low whispering sound. "Ashley? Jason?" Lily whispered, recognizing her friend's features. The silhouettes stopped suddenly, then simultaneously pointed toward the lake. Their lips moved, but the sounds they made were like split echoes. "Go back. To the water." Lily felt the ground go from under her feet. She knew it was a trap. "Run, now," she shouted, grabbing Emma's arm. The 3 ran toward the shore, but the fog grew thicker. The ground beneath their feet became viscous, as if the lake itself were pulling them in. Lily looked around in a panic until she saw a vague light ahead. It was the old church she had come to once before for salvation. "Over there," she shouted, pointing toward the church. But as they drew nearer, the fog began to thicken at its very door. The caller emerged from the haze. His huge figure filled the space, and his eyes burned brighter than before. Silhouettes reappeared behind him, and their whispers turned to howls. "This is the end," shrieked Tom, stepping back. "No!" shouted Lily, grabbing his arm. "We have to get to the bell." She grabbed the lighter she still kept from last time and, grabbing a vial of gasoline from her backpack, quickly arranged a torch. "Fire! He's afraid of fire." Lily set fire to dry branches near the church. The flames soared upward, tearing through the mist. The caller roared, retreating a few steps, but it didn't disappear. "Inside," she commanded. Inside the church, everything was ruined. The bell lay on the floor, as if someone had dropped it on purpose so no one could use it. "What now?" Emma asked in a panic. Lily stared at the broken bell. She was filled with despair. Without it, they couldn't stop the caller. "We won't be able to," she muttered. But Tom suddenly pointed to an old organ in the corner. "What about that? A sound, right? Maybe it'll work." "It may be our only chance," Lily agreed. They ran to the organ. Emma sat down at the keyboard and began to play. The first notes echoed through the empty church, sounding muffled but powerful. The caller burst inside. His figure wriggled, He snarled and hissed like a hunted animal, but the sound of the organ began to slow him down. He thrashed about in the air as if he couldn't get any farther. "Hurry up!" Lily shouted, tossing whatever she could find into the fire. Finally, the sound reached its peak. The organ rattled so loudly that the walls of the church began to shake. The caller screamed, his body beginning to disintegrate into pieces. One by one, the silhouettes behind him disappeared. The fog began to dissipate, and with it, the caller disappeared. The last scream echoed in the silence, and then there was a sepulchral silence. The next morning, Lily, Tom, and Emma left the lake. They were silent the whole way, unable to process what had happened. But as they left, Lily noticed that the water of the lake had become clearer. The shadows no longer lurked in the depths. Perhaps their fight had indeed ended the curse. However, somewhere in the back of her mind, Lily knew some mysteries never completely disappear, and the caller might only be lurking, waiting for the next moment to emerge again. After returning, Lily decided never to touch the subject of the lake again. She forbade herself to even think about the place. Tom and Emma, who had been through it with her, went their separate ways, not keeping in touch. Their silence spoke more than any words. Neither of them wanted to remember the horror, but the past wouldn't let go. After a few months, Lily began to notice strange things. She felt like she was being watched, even though no one was around. Sometimes at night, she heard the same whisper, barely audible, "Come back." She tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. But the unsettling feeling grew. Lily came home one day and found a letter on the table. It was impossible. The doors and windows were locked. No one could have gotten in. With a shiver in her hands, she opened the envelope. Inside was only a photograph. It showed a group of people against a lake. All of them were familiar to her. They were Ashley, Jason, the old woodsman, Tom, and Emma. They were standing together, but their faces looked pale, almost dead. On the back of the photo was an inscription. "You're still a part of this. Come back before it gets worse." Lily felt a cold sweat run down her back. Her life was starting to fall apart. She tried to contact Tom and Emma, but their cell phones were unavailable. When she found Tom's address and drove to his house, she found an empty house covered in a layer of dust, as if it hadn't been visited in a long time. There was a news report that another group of hikers had gone missing in the lake area. Lily realized that this was no coincidence. She was once again part of the game being run by the caller. One foggy evening, Lily couldn't take it anymore. She gathered her equipment and returned to the lake. This time she was alone. No one had agreed to help her. The lake greeted her with absolute silence. The water was as smooth as glass, and the wreckage of their old camp lay on the shore. "I'm here," Lily said into the void, trying to contain the tremor in her voice. The fog began to thicken. Lily heard the whispering grow louder. It was different this time. It wasn't calling her to the lake. Now the whisper was coming from deep within the forest. She took the flashlight and followed the sound. The forest seemed endless. Trees flanked her, and it seemed as if something lurked behind each one. Finally, Lily came to a small clearing. In the center stood the same old man who had once saved her. "You're back," he said, but his voice sounded unnatural, as if with a slight echo. You're dead, aren't you?" Lily breathed out. "Did you think it would be over? No, the lake never lets go. You're part of it now." The old man reached out to her, but Lily backed away. "No, I destroyed it. I ended the curse." "No, Lily," the old man said with a wry smile. "You only woke up what was sleeping deeper." Behind him, the fog began to billow, and figures began to emerge from it. The caller was there, but he looked different now. His silhouette was more massive, and a light burst from his chest, as if it were coming from within. Lily realized this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something far more terrifying. Lily felt the ground beneath her feet shake. The air became thick as if she were underwater, and every cell in her body screamed danger. The fog began to encircle her from all sides, hiding the forest and leaving only the clearing, the old man, and the caller. "What do you mean?" she asked, clutching the lantern so tightly that her fingers turned white. The old man, or what now stood in his guise, took a step forward. His eyes glowed a sickly yellow, and his voice grew more and more unreal. "You thought you had destroyed evil? No, you only awakened its true incarnation. The lake isn't just a place, it's a gateway, and now it's open." "A gateway? To where?" Lily's voice shook, but she tried to maintain control. The old man grinned. "To something that's been sleeping here for centuries. You heard the whispers. You've seen the shadows. They are but messengers. The true master of the lake has awakened, and you brought him here." Suddenly the fog began to thicken around the figure of the caller. His outline began to distort, as if he were losing his shape. A bright light burst from within it, and with a loud rumble, the ground beneath Lily shook. "Run!" the old man shouted, but his eyes were no longer angry or threatening, only desperate. The ground cracked beneath her feet, and thick black smoke began to billow from the fissures. It rose to the sky, enveloping everything around her until Lily felt her lungs fill with the suffocating darkness. She turned and ran, not knowing where her path led. The forest seemed to move, to change, locking her in an endless maze. The whispering grew louder, turning into a roar. "You're not leaving. You belong here." Finally, she pulled onto the shore of the lake. The boat they had once used still lay half submerged in the mud. Without thinking, Lily jumped into it and began rowing toward the center. The water below her was calm, but its surface was beginning to glow with a dim green light. Lily looked down and saw something that made her heart sink. In the depths she saw a huge eye. "It's impossible," she whispered. Giant tentacles began to rise from the water, each moving with unnatural grace. They wrapped around the boat, lifting it above the water. Lily screamed, clutching at the sides, but the tentacles clamped down harder. "You wanted the truth," came a voice from deep inside her mind. "Now you'll be a part of it." Lily closed her eyes, waiting for the end, but suddenly something inside her flared. She remembered the old man's words, "The lake is a gateway. If it was a gate, then it could be closed." She grabbed a knife from her backpack and, gathering all her strength, plunged it into one of the tentacles. The creature roared, releasing her boat. She fell into the water, but she didn't stop. She began to swim to the opposite shore, where she could see the ruins of an old tower. Lily reached the shore with her last strength. In the tower, she found an ancient altar covered with runes. In the center stood a bowl into which a thin trickle of water from the lake flowed. She remembered the old man's words, "Only sacrifice can close the gate." Lily realized that he was talking about her. "I won't let it spread," she whispered, gathering all her strength. She put her hands into the bowl and said, "Let it be over." The water in the bowl erupted, and then the lake behind her began to bubble. A huge water vortex rose above the water, pulling in the creature, the mist, and Lily herself. The next morning, the lake looked peaceful. The water had become clear, the forest had come alive. No one heard the whispers anymore, but Lily was gone. She had become part of the lake, sealing away the evil so that it would never come out again. The legend of the guardian of the lake began to pass from mouth to mouth, but people still tried to stay away from the place, sensing that something ancient and dangerous still lingered in the depths. Although Lily sealed the evil and seemingly saved the world from the awakening of an ancient creature, the legends of the lake and its secrets may still live on. The question remains, did she truly destroy the threat for good, or did she only delay the inevitable? A few years passed. The locals started talking about the lake again. At first it was just rumors, whispers in the night, strange shadows in the forest. Then the disappearances began. Tourists who dared to camp on the shore disappeared without a trace. And one day, someone claimed to have seen a woman in white standing by the water. Her silhouette looked like Lily, but her eyes glowed with the same yellow light that had once belonged to the caller.